man tried to intimidate a woman at the gym, he had no idea she was a Navy SEAL. What happened next left the entire room speechless. The gym was a familiar sanctuary for Clara Hayes, a place where she could clear her mind and push her limits. At 34, she was a woman of quiet power, the kind who exuded confidence through her discipline rather than boastfulness. She wasn't there for socializing or attention, she was there to work. As she adjusted the weights on the squat rack, Bradley Jenkins approached. His presence, uninvited and unwelcome, loomed over her like a storm cloud. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly a gym regular, but there was something unsettling about the way he smirked when she acknowledged him, an arrogance that seemed to think it could intimidate her. "You're using that wrong," he said, his voice laced with condescension, his arms crossed in that posture that screamed entitlement. Clara Hayes calmly removed one of her earbuds, her expression unchanging. "Excuse me," she asked, keeping her voice steady. The man repeated his criticism, going so far as to suggest that she might hurt herself if she didn't adjust her form. Clara Hayes gave a small, polite smile and responded, "Thanks, but I've got it." She expected him to move on, but he didn't. Instead, he stayed by her side, watching her with what seemed like increasing irritation. His actions felt less like concern and more like an attempt to assert dominance, to make her doubt herself. But Clara, trained in both mental and physical resilience, wasn't fazed. Her focus remained on the task at hand, her movements fluid and controlled, all while he hovered nearby like an annoying shadow. Bradley Jenkins, sensing Clara's unshaken focus, grew more frustrated. His earlier condescension hadn't gotten under her skin, so he pushed further, attempting to provoke a reaction. As she moved to the bench press, adjusting the weights, he spoke again, his voice louder this time so everyone nearby could hear. "Women like you think they know everything, huh?" The words landed like a heavy stone, stirring the room. Clara Hayes froze mid-movement, her grip tightening on the barbell, as she turned to face him. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes, sharp and unwavering, were a silent warning. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice low but firm. The gym fell into a tense silence, a few heads turning to witness what was unfolding. Bradley Jenkins, emboldened by the attention, shrugged dismissively. "I'm just saying," he muttered. "Maybe you should stick to what you're good at." Clara didn't flinch, instead returning his gaze with a steady stare. Without saying another word, she resumed her set, but the air around them had shifted, thick with anticipation. Bradley Jenkins's words lingered in the space, sour and heavy, and Clara Hayes could feel the weight of his judgment pressing in. But she didn't react. She wasn't interested in playing into his need for control. The tension continued to build, and with each passing moment he grew bolder, his frustration spilling over into insults that she ignored with practiced ease. She had been through worse than this, had dealt with far more than a man's misguided assumptions. But it wasn't about what he said, it was about his need to impose his insecurity onto someone else. Bradley Jenkins, sensing his words weren't having the desired effect, took another step closer, his face twisted with irritation, his jaw clenching as if he could will Clara Hayes to react. She remained calm, each of her movements deliberate and measured, the weight of her focus unbroken. But the more he lingered, the more his frustration grew, his body language becoming more erratic. Clara could feel the shift in the air, the way the tension had thickened around them, how the room was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. He wasn't backing down, and neither was she. As she finished her set and stood to hydrate, he followed her again, this time more aggressively. Leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, he glared at her. "I'm talking to you," he barked. Clara Hayes' grip tightened on her water bottle, but she didn't turn to face him immediately. Instead, she took a long sip, feeling the cool liquid settle her nerves. The seconds passed like hours. He was looking for a confrontation, but Clara wasn't going to give it to him. When she finally did turn, her eyes locked on his, the calmness in her gaze, like a flicker of something too strong for him to understand. "Struggling," she repeated, her tone quiet but firm. "The only thing I'm struggling with is your inability to leave me alone." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. The gym-goers nearby were watching now, unsure whether to intervene or wait for the next exchange. But the room was different now. This was no longer just a woman trying to work out. It was a battle of wills. One Clara Hayes wasn't about to lose. Bradley Jenkins's face twisted into a sneer, his patience gone. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his anger fueling his every movement. "You think you're so much better than me, huh?" he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "What makes you so special?" His fists clenched at his sides, his body language screaming aggression. Clara Hayes felt the room tighten around them, the silent tension now palpable. The eyes of the gym were fixed on them, some hesitant, others brimming with anticipation. But Clara Hayes wasn't intimidated. She didn't rise to meet his aggression with equal force, but instead, her posture remained grounded, centered, unwavering. "Nothing makes me special," she said, her voice steady, calm. "But I know how to handle myself. Do you?" The question hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. He paused, his anger flickering for just a moment, but it was enough to throw him off balance. He didn't expect her to remain so composed, so unshaken. He had underestimated her. His lips curled back in frustration, and he took another step toward her, as though daring her to respond. But Clara Hayes remained steady, her gaze unflinching. "Why don't you step back and think before you speak?" she continued, her tone quiet but unyielding. "Because if you keep pushing me, you'll regret it." There was no hint of fear in her voice. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of anything. And in that moment it was clear to everyone who had been watching, Clara Hayes was not someone you could easily control or intimidate. Bradley Jenkins, however, was beginning to realize that he had made a dangerous miscalculation. For a moment, Bradley Jenkins seemed to hesitate, his pride warring with the fear and shame that had overtaken him. His fists clenched at his sides, but Clara Hayes's gaze, unflinching and unyielding, kept him rooted in place. Finally, with a defeated huff, he grabbed his bag and stormed out of the gym, muttering curses under his breath. The door slammed behind him, and the silence that followed felt like a release, a collective exhale. As the chaos of the moment settled, Clara Hayes remained composed, her breathing steady. She wasn't looking for applause, but when it came, soft clapping that grew into a wave of approval, it didn't faze her. The lesson wasn't in the applause, it was in the respect she'd earned without having to raise her voice, without having to fight. As Clara Hayes gathered her belongings, the adrenaline slowly began to fade. Her body was still alert, but her mind was already quieting, processing what had just transpired. She wasn't the type to dwell on victories, especially not in front of an audience. But today, something felt different. The room had witnessed not just a physical altercation but a shift, something that couldn't be easily undone. As she turned to leave the gym, she noticed a few lingering glances from her fellow gym-goers. Some nodded in silent acknowledgement, others hesitated, unsure of what to say or how to react. One young man approached her, his voice filled with awe. "That was incredible," he said, almost reverently. "Are you like some kind of martial artist?" Clara Hayes paused for a beat, her expression softening, but her response was steady and calm. "Something like that," she replied, offering him a small, nonchalant smile. Her words hung in the air for a moment, leaving the young man to process their weight. It wasn't the skill that had won the day, it was the ability to remain calm in the face of provocation. To stand tall, unwavering when all eyes were on her. She didn't need to shout, to show off. She just needed to act, swiftly, decisively. As she walked out, her eyes met the young woman behind the counter. The girl, clearly still shaken but inspired, approached her with a hesitant, shy smile. "I just want to say thank you. I've never seen anyone handle themselves like that." Clara Hayes gave a simple nod, offering a quiet, reassuring smile. "It's not about what you can do. It's about knowing when to do it." Her words weren't meant to be profound, but in that moment they held the weight of everything she had just shown the room. Strength isn't just in the muscle, it's in the mind. As Clara Hayes walked to her car, the usual hum of the evening traffic seemed distant, almost muted. Her steps were measured, her mind still running through the events of the gym, but with a clarity she hadn't expected. She hadn't just stood her ground for herself, she had stood for something larger. She had shown everyone in that room what it meant to refuse to be intimidated, and in doing so, she had unknowingly sparked a shift. She could already feel the change in the air as she moved through the parking lot. People greeted her differently now, with respect in their eyes, a subtle acknowledgement that hadn't been there before. It wasn't about her physical strength. It was the quiet, unwavering confidence that had made the difference. It was about her ability to maintain control, to not let aggression derail her focus. That evening, Clara Hayes sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine. She thought about Sophie Collins, the young woman at the counter who had approached her afterward, and the others who had witnessed the scene. They'd seen firsthand how one person's resilience could redefine a moment, how a single act of standing firm could ripple through a room. The gym had become more than just a place to work out. It had become a reminder that strength isn't just for the physical. It's about having the courage to set boundaries, to stand tall in the face of challenge, and to demand respect without ever having to raise your voice. In that moment, Clara Hayes realized something profound. Sometimes it's not about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you're more than capable of handling whatever life throws at you. The following week, Clara Hayes returned to the gym, her presence unassuming as ever. Her usual routine resumed without any outward change, but she could feel it. The shift. The air was different. People watched her, but not with the same hesitance or quiet judgment that had been there before. Now, there was respect in their gaze. They had seen what she was capable of, and it wasn't about size, force, or loud words. It was the calm, confident way she had carried herself, and the undeniable clarity with which she had drawn the line. As she made her way to the squat rack, she noticed Sophie Collins, who had been at the counter the night of the incident, watching her from the corner. Sophie's eyes were wide, almost as though she was waiting for something, unsure but hopeful. When Clara Hayes met her gaze, Sophie smiled softly, then approached her, her steps tentative, like she wasn't sure whether it was appropriate to speak or not. "Hey," Sophie Collins said, her voice a bit shy. "I just wanted to thank you, again, for what you did last week." Clara Hayes gave a small, understanding smile, pausing her set. "No need to thank me. It wasn't for the applause. Just for me, for what I know I can handle." Sophie Collins seemed to absorb that, looking at Clara Hayes with new admiration. "I've been thinking about it, you know. I never would have had the courage to do what you did. When that guy started yelling, I froze. I didn't know what to do." Clara Hayes set the weights down, her expression steady but kind. "It's not about bravery, Sophie. It's about being prepared for those moments. Not just physically, but mentally. When you know what you're capable of, fear doesn't control you." Sophie Collins nodded, her lips pressing together thoughtfully. "I've been letting fear control me for so long, letting people walk over me. But I want to change that." Clara Hayes's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to Sophie. "You don't need to be anyone else. Just learn to trust yourself. The rest will follow." Sophie Collins smiled, the kind of smile that comes from a real shift in perspective. She wasn't just talking about self-defense or gym etiquette. This was deeper, something about standing up for herself, about refusing to shrink in the face of others' demands. Over the next few weeks, Clara Hayes's influence spread subtly through the gym. Sophie Collins wasn't the only one who had been watching and learning. Some of the regulars who had been silently observing the confrontation began to open up. People started acknowledging their boundaries, started confronting their own passive acceptance of disrespect. It was never the intention to be a role model, but Clara Hayes had become one anyway, not through any grand gestures or speeches, but through a quiet consistency. She didn't just teach people how to handle aggressive men at the gym, she taught them how to stand firm when life itself tries to make them shrink, how to maintain their space and their dignity when others test it. Her days at the gym began to feel less like solitary workouts and more like moments of collective empowerment, and Clara Hayes realized that she hadn't just fought off one man. She had helped countless others fight back in their own ways, reclaiming their confidence and strength. The gym, which had once been a space for personal growth and physical challenge, had now become a community where respect and resilience were the true markers of strength. As the weeks went on, Clara Hayes continued her routine, never flaunting the lessons she had imparted, but always living them. The gym, once a place where she'd quietly worked to better herself, now felt like a space of shared strength. Every corner held stories of quiet victories, unspoken but understood. Sophie Collins had begun to step into her own power, holding her head higher, engaging more confidently in conversations with the other gym members. Other women who had once avoided confrontation began to speak up, even if just in small moments, refusing to let themselves be bulldozed by the louder, more entitled voices. Clara Hayes never sought recognition for her actions, nor did she need it. The respect she commanded wasn't because of force, but because she knew when to act and when to stay composed. Her calm strength had become a subtle lesson to all who crossed her path. She had taught them all something far greater than self-defense. She had shown them what it meant to stand tall, unshaken and unwavering in the face of adversity. On a quiet Thursday evening, as Clara Hayes packed her gym bag, she caught sight of the man who had challenged her that day. He was standing by the door, looking around as if unsure whether to return. His eyes met Clara's, but there was no hostility in them. Instead, he gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson learned. Clara Hayes's lips curved into the faintest smile. She didn't need him to speak, didn't need an apology. The shift in him was clear. His arrogance had been replaced with humility, his aggression with understanding. Clara Hayes left the gym that night with no fanfare, but a quiet sense of pride. The room, once full of tension and doubt, now pulsed with the unspoken truth that strength lies not in overpowering others, but in the courage to hold your ground with grace and conviction. It was a reminder to all that real power is quiet, and that when we stand firm in who we are, we change the world around us without ever having to raise our voices. The story of Clara Hayes's encounter at the gym offers valuable lessons that resonate beyond just physical confrontation. In today's world, we often face situations where others try to undermine or intimidate us, whether in the workplace, in social circles, or even online. Clara Hayes's calm, controlled response teaches us the power of standing firm in the face of disrespect and aggression. It's not always about fighting back. Sometimes, true strength lies in maintaining composure and responding with confidence, without being drawn into unnecessary conflict. In moments of tension, it's important to assess the situation calmly before reacting. Like Clara Hayes, we can draw on inner strength and self-awareness to diffuse volatile situations without escalating them. Recognizing when to speak up and when to let things go is an essential life skill. And just like Clara Hayes, we don't need to prove anything to anyone. Our actions should be a reflection of who we are and what we stand for. Moreover, standing up for oneself encourages others to do the same. Clara Hayes's bravery and refusal to be intimidated sparked a shift in the gym, inspiring others to find their voice and assert their boundaries. In our own lives, we can be the change we want to see by living with integrity and standing up for what's right, no matter how small the situation may seem.